Okay, so let's try to unpack this. I want you to picture just two completely different images of the same group, but separated by about 20 years. So in the first one, back in the late 90s, you have this bizarre, almost, theatrical rigidity. You have men banning television, and not just banning it, but literally hanging TV sets from trees like they were criminals.
Wow.
And shaving the heads of professional football players. For what? For wearing shorts. It's almost dark comedy, but with, absolute power behind it.
And then you have that second image today, that exact same movement. And now they're managing international airports.
Yeah.
They're issuing official audited budget statements on Twitter, of all places. They're running these sophisticated diplomatic channels out of their office in Qatar.
Yeah.
And they're using encrypted messaging on smartphones for policy discussions.
Yeah.
Probably more effectively than a lot of Western governments.
It's a staggering contrast. I mean, how does a movement whose entire identity was built on rejecting the 20th century, how do they become so good at using the tools of the 21st?
Well, our sources suggest that just calling it pragmatism doesn't really cut it. It's not deep enough to really get the mechanism of this shift, not just what changed, but how it changed. We need a more rigorous philosophical tool.
And that's where we're going today. We're going to apply Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel's philosophy of history, specifically his concept of the cunning of reason.
And what's so fascinating here is how the 2 decades of American occupation, which was driven entirely by its own interests, of course, it unintentionally became the single biggest modernizing force for the very insurgency it was trying to defeat. It's a textbook Hegelian sequence.
Okay, so for anyone who, maybe hasn't looked at Hegel since college, can you give us the quick version of that sequence?
Sure. So Hegel basically proposed that history moves forward through conflict. You have an original idea, the thesis, which then clashes with its opposite, the antithesis. And out of that clash comes a third thing, a new result that's fundamentally altered, the synthesis.
Right. So that makes our mission for this deep dive really clear. We need to trace that whole journey, starting with the original idea, the thesis.
The pre-modern emirate of the 1990s.
The original rigid rural Pashtun order.
Exactly. And to get their worldview, you really have to put yourself in their information ecosystem at the time. I mean, this is before the internet was everywhere, especially in places like rural Khyber Pakhtunkhwa.
What was the main source of information?
Often it was the faint crackling signal of the BBC World Service on shortwave radio. The sources even mention the frequency 15.31 megahertz. It was like a global university being beamed into the most remote places.
The global university?
Yeah.
I love that detail because that radio signal is bringing in all these modern ideas, right? Collapsing empires, global finance.
All of it. But when the first Taliban emerged, their response to that modern world was to declare war on it.
An ideological war.
Absolutely. Their mission was purity, a strict, unyielding Islamic order as they defined it. They were trying to, in effect, reverse cultural time.
We mentioned the televisions hanged from trees, which is such a powerful symbol.
It is. It wasn't enough to just turn them off. They had to be publicly destroyed to reject what they represented. They stripped all music from the radio, too. You were only allowed to hear political sermons and jihadist motivational chants.
And the visual control was just as strict.
Total. Women forced into the burqa. Non-Muslims ordered to wear yellow badges, so they were instantly identifiable.
And this is where that philosophical idea becomes really visible, right? The pre-modern mindset just smacks right into a world it doesn't get. And the result is this kind of governance that feels medieval, almost absurd.
And the sources are just full of these unforgettable anecdotes that define that regime.
You have to tell us about the Quetta football team.
Okay, so the Quetta football team. They travel to Kandahar for a friendly match. And they're immediately seized by the religious police.
Why?
Their shorts. They were deemed immodest, a violation of the Islamic requirement for covering what they call satra.
So what was the punishment for wearing shorts?
To make sure the lesson was learned, half the team had their heads publicly shaved right then and there. The other players literally had to flee to the Pakistani consulate for safety.
Wow. That kind of public, arbitrary justice, it feels so rooted in a very specific, isolated context. It's hard to imagine that in a modern capital city.
Precisely. And that perspective, that rural perspective, it extended to everything, even how they tried to run the state.
Like with the case of Jumma.
Yes, the famous case of Jumma. He was sentenced to death in Kabul's football stadium for alleged sodomy. But it's the method of execution that's so telling. They chose to have a high wall toppled onto him.
A punishment he somehow survived.
He did miraculously survive. And while a public execution is horrific, the method itself, a wall, not a firing squad or a hanging, it says so much about the tools and the mindset the state had at its disposal.
You can contrast that with the story of the Minister of Electricity.
Yes. During a citywide blackout, he was reportedly found climbing an electric pole himself, trying to fix a wire.
I mean, on one hand, you could say that's, hands-on leadership.
And the sources note that for a local official from a village, Akaliwal, they'd say that's normal behavior. You just solved the local problem. But to the outside world, it was just more evidence of a state that had almost no central function, no modern infrastructure.
And the absolute peak of this cultural dissonance has to be the Y2K bug.
Oh, absolutely. International officials are trying to explain this coming global tech crisis to a Taliban delegation. And after thinking it over, their solution was to use, and this is a quote, some old computers lying in a room to fix it.
Some old computers lying in a room.
That phrase, it just perfectly encapsulates the thesis. The mindset was absolutely that of villagers thrown overnight into a century they neither understood nor trusted.
Even Mullah Omar's escape from Kandahar, on a simple Honda motorcycle, it makes perfect sense in that low-tech rural context.
Exactly. So that's our thesis, the rigid, pre-modern, isolationist emirate.
Okay, so thesis, clearly defined. Now comes the dialectic, the collision, and that starts in 2001. The thesis that pre-modern emirate collides head-on with the antithesis.
The American-backed Afghan Republic.
Which was this massive modernizing force. It was built around state institutions, international norms, global finance, and critically rapid tech development.
The U.S. invasion and occupation just violently threw the Taliban into a totally new world. I mean, over 20 years, the occupation didn't just fight the insurgency, it completely rebuilt the environment they were operating in.
Right.
Before 2001, Afghanistan was in ruins.
Right.
By 2021, you have rapid urbanization, a booming media market, widespread digital connectivity, a whole generation of young Afghans who are fluent in social media and Western statecraft.
Okay, so this is where I feel like I have to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Why do we need Hegel for this? Isn't this just, organizational pragmatism?
Yeah.
If you're fighting a modern army, of course you're going to learn to use their technology. Any insurgency would adapt.
That's a fair question, and it's a critical one. We need Hegel because of the Cunning of Reason. That concept is the key.
Explain that.
It states that history, or what Hegel called the world spirit, achieves its own goals through the unintended, often contradictory actions of individuals or states who are just pursuing their own limited, self-interested goals.
So, the U.S. didn't want to modernize the Taliban, but it happened anyway as a byproduct of them pursuing their own goals.
Exactly. The explicit goal of the American occupation was to destroy the Taliban. But in doing that, by building infrastructure, setting up a modern central bank, introducing mobile phone networks, creating a media landscape, the U.S. inadvertently created the conditions and provided the tools for the insurgency to survive and, more importantly, to evolve.
They were forced to adapt or die. Suddenly, these isolated rural fighters are using smartphones. They're using encrypted apps for secure communications. They're making these slick, high-def propaganda videos for a global audience, not just for people listening to shortwave radio.
The entire nature of the movement changed. The political office in Doha, operating with all this bureaucratic sophistication, managing diplomacy, writing budgets, that was simply impossible for the Pashtun Kalawal leaders of 1996.
The environment changed them?
Radically. The insurgency, acting just out of self-preservation, had to learn the language and the tools of the modern state. They ended up internalizing the very methods of the regime they were fighting.
The violence of modernization created the path for their own success.
It did. And the result of that violent collision is the synthesis, the 2021 regime, which is, it's almost unrecognizable from its predecessor. They didn't go back to the 90s. They successfully absorbed the tools of the antithesis.
So what does that synthesis look like now on the ground? You said they moved into the state instead of destroying it.
Crucially, yes. They inherited the whole modern state apparatus. Our sources describe it as inheriting a fully furnished house from the Americans.
A house built by their enemies, which is the incredible irony here.
Precisely. A functioning bureaucracy, technical ministries, a central bank, international protocols, all built by U.S.-backed technocrats. And the 2021 Taliban didn't burn it all down. They just moved in and, tried to wear the clothes of the last people who lived there.
And moving into that system, it must have forced some immediate and very obvious cultural contradictions.
Oh, absolutely. The same movement that shaved footballers' heads for wearing shorts now not only tolerates but actively fields a national football team and a cricket team. A globally recognized cricket team, which is a huge source of national pride and soft power for them.
Right.
And while the restrictions on women are back and they are severe, Afghanistan still has television channels, some even with female presenters, for a time. That would have been unthinkable heresy in the first regime.
It seems like internalizing the state also changed their geopolitical outlook.
It definitely did. When you move into that fully furnished bureaucratic house, you also absorb some of the previous government's institutional memory. Its geopolitical habits. We see it with the Duran Line issue resurfacing, which was a point of tension for the old republic, and their surprisingly warm posture toward India, especially during the BJP era. When you inherit a foreign ministry, you also inherit its complex map of relationships.
So this brings us to where we are now, this contradictory fusion. They're operating modern state ministries, a central bank, airports, but they're trying to govern with the ideology of a pre-modern isolationist emirate.
And this is why the current synthesis is so unstable. Like any Hegelian arrangement, it is being stretched to the breaking point by its own internal contradictions. It's an experiment, just suspended in uncertainty.
Where are the most visible cracks showing right now?
I'd say two main areas, internal division and contradictory policy goals. Internally, there's a deep split. You have the pragmatic Doha group, the ones who learned bureaucracy and diplomacy for 20 years, versus the hardline clerical leadership in Kandahar who value ideological purity above all else.
The 1990s faction versus the 2021 faction.
In a way, yes. And their policy goals are just irreconcilable. They desperately need international recognition and foreign investment to keep the lights on. But at the same time, they stick to this strict religious worldview that requires hosting jihadist groups and enforcing rules like the ban on female education that actively scare away international engagement.
You can't really do both.
You can't. You cannot manage a modern central bank which has to use interest usury to function, while the religious police in Kandahar are condemning interests as fundamentally un-Islamic. That contradiction puts immense unsustainable stress on the whole system.
And it seems like the harder they try to enforce those old certainties from the 90s, the more these new opposing forces pop up, their own new antitheses.
Exactly. The forces that grew up during the U.S. occupation. Think of the Afghan women who were educated and had careers between 2001 and 2021. They refused to just vanish quietly. Or the huge population of urban youth who grew up with social media and global culture.
They're now being ruled by men who are trying to bring back a world they thought was gone forever.
That generational clash, that cultural conflict, that's the new grinding tension of the dialectic.
Which raises the big question. How long can this last? I mean, the synthesis of 2021 can't be the final word.
It can't be. The current regime is a transitional moment. It's an interim arrangement that is destined for a future rupture.
And what could that rupture look like?
It could be an internal reform, an outright civil war between factions, or just a total collapse of the state because the economy implodes. But the synthesis of medieval ideology and modern statecraft is not a sustainable model. Not indefinitely.
So, the conclusion, based on everything we've unpacked, it feels inescapable. The Taliban, for all their claims of religious timelessness and rejecting the modern world, are being profoundly reshaped by the very historical forces they thought they could defy.
History is, as Hegel put it, a slaughter bench. It's where the spirit of the world advances, grinding away everything that's obsolete. The ultimate choice for the Taliban now is this. Will they cling to the certainties of the 1990s and risk being crushed by a world that technologically and economically just doesn't allow for that kind of isolation anymore?
Or will they recognize the direction that the Weltgeist, the world spirit of history itself, is moving, and align themselves with a future they can't actually escape? That choice, that one difficult choice, is what will determine the destiny of Afghanistan. They learned how to use the tools of modernity. The question now is whether modernity will ultimately consume them.